Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Open House Day for the 164th edition of the International Photography Exhibition here at the RPS. IPE is the longest running contemporary photographic exhibition in the world, and this year's edition brings together 100 works, well, more than 100 works from 46 photographers from around the world, exploring themes of identity, cultural heritage, gender, sexuality, mental health, and environmental and political issues. This year's edition is particularly exciting because it mixes both traditional and alternative photographic processes such as analog, cyanotype, and collage, which shows again just how much RPS is inclusive of all types of photography. We have some wonderful speakers lined up today. The first is Owen Harvey. Owen is a London-based photographer whose work explores human connection, whether through candid moments or portraiture, with a special interest in subcultures ranging from skinheads to contemporary dancers, imams to dominatrix. One of his pictures from his series Young Fathers is included in this edition of the IPE, and I'm going to let Owen take it from here and introduce his work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's very nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work in general, going for a few various projects and then leading up to the image that is in the show. So I work making mainly personal documentary work, and alongside this I shoot for a range of brands and sometimes also editorial titles. Studied at West Arts College in Watford where I grew up, and then went to Newport in Wales from 2010 to 2013. So really my story, I guess, like everyone's story, starts with their parents. And this is what I think is an amazing picture that my dad found on the internet about, probably found it a couple of years ago now, which I just thought was amazing, on an old forum for Chelsea Football Club. And my dad was massively into Chelsea Football Club and used to sort of go around travelling and mainly, obviously, sort of with the local guys that he was hanging around with, and was kind of, I guess, really involved in that whole world. I love this picture as well. It's the guy right where you can see the policeman's hat. Looks a little bit like Ozzy Osbourne on the left, which I think is great. So I kind of grew up going to football myself with my dad. I used to go to see a non-league team called Wealdstone Football Club really often. And I kind of hear a lot of stories about I guess his youth and about growing up, and I guess being part of something that was, I guess, his equivalent of, you know, I guess going to church every weekend. This was his place where he went every weekend. So I was kind of always excited by that and would take a lot of that in. He also introduced me to this, which was a real pivotal moment for me. It was the first picture story that I ever saw. But sort of without knowing it at the time, and that's the booklet of Quadrophenia by a photographer called Ethan Russell. And essentially it's a fictional documentary story. And when I saw these pictures, I was kind of at the time more interested in the music. I'm going to flick through some of them quickly. But at this point, I would have been about 12 or 13 years old, I guess, and the pictures, I guess, really resonated with me. I thought they were amazing pictures. But as I said, the music really was what took me the most. And then I went back to these pictures later when I was probably about 15 or 16 and was sort of really fascinated by them. At the time, when I was about 15 or 16, I started kitchen portering, which interestingly, the character in these pictures is doing as well. So I guess I saw some of myself in these pictures. Some more pictures from the booklet. And then I started thinking about I started taking pictures. I was playing music for a long time first, from that influence of, I guess, everything that I'd seen and all the music I'd heard as from a youngster, basically from my dad. And I played music from when I was about 16 to when I was about 21, touring quite a lot and playing different shows. Here's me in 2009, playing Download Festival. And this really was my first love, was music. Sort of really excited by that and wasn't really engaging with photography yet. But during the later half, I guess in 2009 probably would have been around the time that I started taking pictures, and the logical step was to photograph things that I knew. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process. The start is always research, I guess. And when I start the process of research or a project, it usually comes organically from having a conversation with someone or finding out more about the subject that I'm exploring. In this case, it was my dad. I realised from an early stage that I was interested in telling my own story, but for other people. I never really had an interest in photograph myself in any way. And also look into what other work has been made around the subject, so photography, film and literature. And this helps to inform me and see if I can bring in something new to the table. And of course, it acts as inspiration. And these are really the three questions that I always ask myself when I start a new body of work. What am I really interested in? Why am I interested in it? And how should I approach it? And the very logical thing to make was this first series, which was all about the UK mod scene. So here's a little bit, if you don't know about what the mod scene is or modernism. It's essentially a subculture that began in the late 1950s, and it's shorthand for modernism, which obviously is, I guess, has a sense of irony about it now, because there's still mods, and it's something that started quite a long time ago. And I wanted to make these pictures that documented the scene, but that also held a sort of timeless quality with no indication of what specific time period they were made in. So you could not tell if they were shot in the late 50s or 60s or present day. And the reason I started making these pictures is because obviously I've been showing this. It was heavily influenced by the Quadrophenia booklet, which is sort of, I guess, a cult British classic film about a young mod. And also from all these stories that I've been told from my dad about different subcultures, etc. And flip through some of these quickly. And what I do, I just go and I photograph during the evenings, quite often over bank holiday weekends, from sort of 9 at night till 6 the next morning, photographing in clubs, etc. And then I'd meet people outside of that to photograph them as well. And I'm sort of interested about, not just about the style was never of the main thing for me on fashion. It was more really how people find their belonging in a sense of a group, and how I guess that creates different ties that are very similar to family. And then I'm still photographing this now. So one of my biggest problems is I can't seem to finish anything. So I started this about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer now, and I'm still making the work. This is more recent work, pictures. These are older ones. And I've just continued to make the work in the same way. At some point, I will go through all of the negatives and work it all out and put it into something more cohesive than a PowerPoint presentation. But for now, this is how it's been shown. And then it resulted in this show, which was my first show, or first solo show, and this was in Carnaby Street. And I showed a variety of the pictures here. Let's quick look into that. And then once I made that work, or kind of come to I think that was about a 5 or 6 year point of making the work, I kind of thought, okay, I've had a small exhibition to show some of the work, and then I thought, what do I do next? This was actually some more pictures from the exhibition where some of the people I'd photographed came down and DJ'd as well, which was great. It was a good fun night. So yeah, I thought, what now? And I realised that most people actually really only have one good idea. This is my feelings anyway. If you're really lucky, you might have a few good ideas or themes that you want to explore. Think of your favourite artists, how many really great standout projects, ideas do they have? I think that there's usually one great idea and a lot of variations on that theme throughout their career. And actually, I don't think that's a bad thing, because it allows you to get to the root of what you're trying to say. And I've kind of realised over time that takes a lot of time to sort of get to the heart of it. So I thought, logical next step, what should I make? And I kind of continued to make work under that umbrella of subculture. And I started photographing the sort of modern day skinhead scene. Again, sort of interesting to me because it's very multi-layered. There was anti-fascist skinheads, there's fascist skinheads, and again, it was kind of all linked up back in the 60s in football culture, etc. So it was kind of a logical next step. So I'm just going to read this quickly. Skinheads drew influence from the early mod style and originally had the music of 1960s Jamaican music as their soundtrack. Those involved in the subculture had a sense of working class pride, and this attribute was often recognised in the white and black youth who grew up across England. The distinct skinhead look went on to be adopted by various fascist groups, and many original skinheads felt it was time to abandon their style due to the negative association. Some true skinheads refused to give up their style, which ultimately caused a divide within the subculture between those with different political stances. So I went around the UK photographing various different people involved in the scene, and I was kind of interested what drew them to want to be part of that scene where it was sort of so multi-complex at this point. And I was making these pictures. Again, this is a real variety taken over the last, I guess, probably 8 or 9 years of different people around England. This was a weekend in Blackpool. I slept on a dressing gown in an Airbnb for a weekend, which was great fun, on the floor. But I guess I was really interested in sort of documenting the whole thing, really. Some more pictures from it. And obviously, a lot of these people I photographed multiple times over different periods. Some of the people in the mod series, especially, I photographed them when they were 16, and then, you know, when they were probably even more like 20 as well. So over quite a long period of time. This is more recent. This was last year, I think. So let's flip through some of this. So, and then I realised there's always bumps in the road having any sort of creative endeavour. Sometimes things won't go to plan, and I'll have obviously a lot of visions for projects that won't ever come to life. In fact, this probably happens more regularly than I'd like it to. And I realised you have to really keep riding the wave, and sometimes you have to take it back to the drawing board. And remember that we always hear about projects that succeed, whatever that sort of looks like, but not so often about the struggles in making the work. And I think after that second body of work I made, I kind of hit a wall, really, and I kind of realised that in one way or another I'd always been photographing essentially probably my dad, really, for other people, which was quite interesting, and never photographed him directly. And then I was kind of more interested about maybe what I could photograph that's more close to home. It's obviously very close to home to me anyway, but more directly towards me. And I grew up listening to a lot of hip hop music through my brother. And I was kind of always interested in that. So I went out to America, and again, sort of making work all under the same umbrella again about how people find their identity in their family. I went to photograph lowriding culture. For those who don't know, it's a sort of Mexican-American subculture, or born in Mexico through Mexican-American youths, and they sort of decorate these cars to hold political statements, and they became very popular in popular music videos and hip hop artists, etc. I won't talk too much about it. I'll show you some of the pictures so you can see. So I went out to New York, and I stayed for 3 months, and I was photographing mainly up in the Bronx and in Harlem, and photographing these people who had sort of really found their I guess their family within this scene. So this is Diablo and Andreas. I won't go into the stories of people too much. Diablo, as you can see, is a Mexican. He's got huge Mexico tattooed across his chest. There's the giveaway. And I guess it was really about the pride of people, and I guess I've always been more interested in making sort of celebratory portraits and pictures of people that really sort of, you know, I guess hero portraits really is kind of what I'm interested in making, and pictures that really celebrate people. So these are some of the pictures from this series. Different people involved in the scene. And I got to an interesting point with this project where I sort of felt a little bit like I understood the importance of making work under this umbrella, as I mentioned earlier, but I didn't also just want to repeat myself forever. So I got to this point where I was, as I said, I was in New York for 3 months, and I started to feel like I needed to make pictures that felt a little bit different. So I didn't come back with a series of pictures that kind of just said the same things as the last one. So I was getting a little bit frustrated. And then I ended up making a picture that sort of changed the project. And that was this picture of Sosa, which everyone called 100-mile-an-hour Sosa, because he literally talks 100 miles an hour and you can't ever shut him up in a nice way. He's great. I love Sosa. And real character, and really, they're all amazing guys, actually, and were very welcoming. And I made this picture. This is under a bridge in Harlem, when we were in his car one night cruising around, and I stepped out and I said, "Oh, it'd be good to take a picture of you here." And to me, this one had a slight different feel than the other. It started to feel maybe a little bit more cinematic. And then I started thinking about that you're trying to sort of make pictures of people, or I was trying to make pictures of people that said something about what they're all about. But really, a lot of people in their lives are, to some extent, playing a character themselves. And that sort of fascinated me more. And then I started to think about how this subculture is so influenced by about music, about cinema, etc. And in my own life, I've been so influenced by that. So I started looking back and thinking about all the influence that I'd had, like I said, from rap music for this project, stuff like that, back to the Quadrophenia booklet and all these sorts of things. So these were some of the sort of references that I really remember in my head, of thinking that were really powerful references of how, from different music videos and cinema. And I started to inject some of that into the work that I was making. So here's Craigo in Mount Vernon. The only time I'd ever heard about Mount Vernon was in a Nas song, which was kind of amazing to finally be there. Stood out like a sore thumb. It's like a skinny white lad from Watford in Mount Vernon, but it was amazing. And I started making these pictures, and I started kind of become more interested in what was going on outside of the frame, as well as kind of what was going on inside the frame, and maybe how that could maybe suggest things. Why are people sitting here? Who's waiting for, who, and all these sorts of questions. So just to summarize that, so for me, this series became stronger when I realized the limitations of photography. I was trying to capture a true essence of an individual who were playing a role, and the picture became stronger when their influences were injected into the images through visual references, in this example, cinema and music. So I was thinking, as I said, about what was going on outside the frame, and this became as important for me about what was happening within it, to sort of build a sense of ambiguity. And I realised that sort of limitations, which kind of goes back to the very first thing that I said, is actually one of photography's strengths, I think. And it just gives you time to really delve into something quite deeply. Here's a picture of me. This was in New York, my room. They're negatives on the floor of what I was shooting. That's me in the corner. And I was shooting every day and meeting up with these guys, going back, and then I was running up to get the next process that I processing lab that was in Manhattan. I can't remember the name of it now. And getting little mini lab prints, and then I'd sticking them all over my wall just to see where I was with things. And anyway, I made this work, came back with it, and then, which actually was in the IPE award at some, I can't remember which one now, and won the under 30s gold award, which was lovely when I was a young nipper. So, and these are the things that I guess I really learned from it. I'd always been aware for some time that I was telling my own story and experiences for others. And as I said, like, one of the most significant things is really the influence that my dad had me through telling stories and for taking me down to football and seeing this. And also one of the other most significant things really was him moving out of my family home when I was about 12 or 13. And I'm sure now, when I ever put these talks together, that it sort of always makes sense. And I sort of understand my own practice more and more. And I'm sure this is why family and belonging comes up so much in my own work. So after I made this work, I kind of started to make work that was not so directly about subculture, but more about male identity, I guess. And I made this work about young fathers. So I was kind of interested that in a time of the digital world, that all I was seeing was like pictures of maybe mothers with their kids on Instagram or on TikTok or whatever it might be, or in adverts, but not so often about young men. So I sort of, I'll read the synopsis here, but you can read yourself. But although outdated stereotypes of parenting between men and women are starting to change for the better, I was still rarely seeing the important representation of young men as loving father figures. So these images are a selection of young fathers and guardians who portray the gentle, influential and caring relationship between fathers and their sons and daughters. And I'll show some of these pictures. And of course, one of these pictures is included in the show today, which you can have a look at if you like. So I started playing. And of course, I'm 33 now, and I guess it was on my mind because a lot of my friends started to have kids. And so it just kind of felt the right time to sort of make work around this as well, which is interesting. Here's some of the pictures from that. And here's the picture that's in the exhibition. And that's where I'm going to end it. So thank you very much for listening.
Do we have any questions for Owen?
Yeah, just wondered how you contacted these guys, you know, all the mods. I mean, was it through the scoot groups and that scooter groups?
Yeah, a variety of things. So the mod stuff, I kind of had an introduction for a guy at school who was really into that whole thing. As I said, I try and keep everything quite close. So whether it be through kind of peers or family, or kind of different introductions like that. The skinhead sort of introduction happened for a commission. I was shooting a small commission for a brand called Fred Perry, which is a brand I guess a lot of those guys see as you know, one of the brands that really represents the subculture. So they were sort of interested in me continuing to hang around with them after that. The low riding stuff, I dropped them an email and said, "Oh, can I come over to America?" And I got a one-line answer back that said "sure," full stop, and a phone number. And I thought, okay, that's enough for me to give it a go. So I flew over, and I had a friend out there as well. So I kind of mixed it as a visiting him, and then also thinking, well, if I could go and photograph something as well, and then phoned them. And I think the guy was actually in disbelief that I got actually flying over from London to New York on a phone number, basically. But then, yeah, so that happened through that, and then a couple of nights later, they sort of, yeah, just pulled up and they said, jump in the car, and that was that. And then I spent 3 months with those guys. So all through different things really, but mainly just, and obviously as photographers know, the more work you make and the more examples you have, I guess the more you can go out and say, oh, this is the work that I've done already.
Yeah, and lots of these groups know one another as well, don't they? So it's carried on.
And I like to think that, you know, all of the work that I'm making is quite celebratory about people.
Sure.
There's no sort of, so I hope that the people who see the work when I'm trying to make work potentially about them, hopefully they see it as, you know, realise the intentions are good, basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Brilliant.
Are you still in touch with any of the groups that you photographed?
Yeah, quite a lot of them. Yeah. So obviously the low riding stuff I'm actually going to carry on this year. I'm going out to Japan though to do it in Tokyo. So kind of interesting different side of it, which is obviously the influence from sort of how it's become more global and the influence from America through to Japan, which is interesting. So I'm going out to do that. But some of the low riding guys are still talk to. A lot of them now it's so easy to talk to, right? Because you're on social media with them, you can drop them a message. A lot of the mod and skinhead people I'm still photographing. The young father stuff I'm carrying on. It's a repeated theme. I can't stop making the work.
Yeah.
But I can't complete anything. So
yeah.
So yeah, I'm still in touch with everyone because I need to be really to continue making the work, you know. So yeah.
Have we got any other questions from the room?
What do you shoot on?
All of this is shot on medium and 35mm film, medium format and 35mm film. This was camera-wise, this was shot on the Mamiya 7, and now quite often I'm just shooting digitally.
Yeah.
So yeah, a real mix to be honest.
Yeah. I find it really interesting how you got from the 35mm and the black and white for the first initial series that you started on.
Yeah.
To get that age of silent went to colour for the mods, for skinheads.
Yeah, I think it just made.
Interesting.
I think it's just what is right for the project, right? And I'm not really a technical geek. I don't care too much about cameras. I just kind of think whatever is right for the project. And there's that expression, isn't it? The best camera is the one that you carry, and I think that's probably true. It's the best, whatever it could be on my phone. I don't really mind. To be honest, I'm more interested in chatting to people than I am in taking pictures.
Yeah.
If I'm totally honest. Cameras is just a real good vehicle for me to be nosy. And you know, recently I've been, you know, I wear a time, but this week I photographed different people, and one guy who had just so many amazing stories, which I was photographing, was that no, not yesterday, the day before. And he had so many good stories. I wouldn't have even cared if I made a picture of him, really. I would have just happily had a cup of tea with him. So it always comes from that, really. And then whatever camera, you know, is there that I can take a picture, maybe. Yeah.
Do you have certain techniques to kind of relax people to shoot, or do you kind of? Well, I mean, like you just said, you just chat, don't you? So I mean, that's your in, isn't it? Yeah,
and I think it's changed over time. You know, at the start, it was very much like with the skin and stuff. I was drinking a lot with them, you know, at the start, if I'm totally honest, and making pictures alongside that. And, you know, now not so much. So now it's just about chatting, really, and conversation, and I guess things kind of happen naturally. I'm a big chat, I can chat all day. So, and I think when people realise that you're genuinely interested in them, then most people tend to sort of relax and actually want to tell. People love to talk about themselves, right? So if you give them that opportunity, you know, I say here, sitting on a podium, and, you know, so given that opportunity, a lot of people will do it. So, yeah.
Did you probably fund going over to America, or did you get a grant or something?
I privately funded it. I was working at a company called Metro Imaging, which was a printing and processing lab, and I worked there for 3 years. I think, no, maybe longer than that, and just saved money. And then thought, okay, well, if I save enough, I know. I basically quit my job, went there for 3 months, came back, broke again, but with some pictures. So I was happy. So basically, I just saved and made the work through that way, really, which was probably quite naive of me. But over time, it's definitely paid back. You know, the jobs have come off of the back of it, and so yeah, I just kind of saw it as an investment, really. Yeah.
Can I ask the final question?
Cool.
I loved your comment about how most people only have one good idea.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting, because I sort of agree, actually. What would you say if you were asked what was your best idea?
Oh God, that's put me on the spot. Best idea was probably to call it after a couple of pints last night and go back to my hotel. No, I think probably my best idea was is to realise, or it wasn't an idea. It was something that I realised, and what I realised was that I was interested in photographing sort of identity and family, and in a weird way, I guess telling my own story but through different people. And once that sort of clicked, it wasn't even, actually I can't even take credit for that, really, because it wasn't me who even said it. I was talking to a photographer called Matt Stewart, who's a street photographer, great street photographer, and he said to me, like, oh, it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that all the work you're doing is you're sort of indirectly photographing yourself or your relationship with your dad, it sounds like, or the things that you learn. And I was like, yeah, I guess it is, actually. And so he actually had, so it wasn't my idea, it was his idea. But yeah, that was, I guess, a light switch moment and gave some clarity on it. So yeah.
That's fascinating. Well, thank you so much for this talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Cool.